In my mind, what excites me, and that's why I'm doing all these things with Docker over there, is that with containers and Docker, the game is changing. It's not about VMs anymore. It's about application workloads, and it's not about long-living workloads, right? I'm going to launch a Docker container, do a task, shut it down. And I'm going to launch thousands of them. I'm going to launch hundreds of thousands of them. And I need a network that is going to be able to respond to all these connectivity requirements happening by this container world. And actually, the way I think things are going to evolve is we're going to also see a computing paradigm model, right? Docker allows you to move the processing to the data versus moving the data to the processing, right? So instead of having a server that picks up data and processes them, you just move the process over there, right? So you end up launching these things very fast, and I think that's a big reason for scale. And that's where we are challenging everybody that you need this type of scale in order to be able to deal with these new environments, these dynamic environments. So, you know, when we're talking about Docker deployments and LXC deployments and all these things, just as an introduction, just in case somebody on the audience doesn't fully understand it, you know, in the virtualization world, we have the server, we have a hypervisor, and potentially a host OS, and then we have the guest OS and the application sitting on top of it, right? We have this essentially two operating systems, one on top of the other, working together. In the case of containers, we have the server hardware with the host OS, and then we have an application level virtualization where we use the namespace techniques in order to share some libraries, have individual file systems if we need to, and be able to multiplex several applications on the same environment, right? Obviously, there are pros and cons. Different people have different preferences. But for Linux on Linux environments, for the new workloads, right, the idea of containers and Docker are becoming increasingly much more attractive. So how do you deploy them and how do you apply policy, right? So, you know, I mean, we have seen that a couple of weeks ago. I saw that better together. The idea is to deploy via Docker containers inside virtual machines. And yes, that's a potential way to do it if you need to. And then the way you would enforce policies, right? Distributed policies, firewall policies, or whatever in between the containers becomes something that you do in the hypervisor, right? And I have seen solutions that's what they propose, that essentially your Docker containers run in VMs. I don't know why you would do that, because why would you do the extra overhead just for that? But anyway, you do it. And then your firewall policies, your security policies, your isolation policies are supplied in the hypervisor, right? At the VM level. Now, we see things a little bit different. We believe that the networking and policy enforcement can run natively inside the Docker host. So we essentially instantiate our VRS inside the Docker host, and then we are able to connect the applications to the VRS. And as they connect on the VRS, the applications participate in the networking as first-class citizens, right? So for two Docker processes that are running up there, I'm going to connect them to the VRS. Any communication between them is going to go through our VRS. Obviously, for another application, it's going to be a completely different networking. Now, for me, the fascinating aspect of this is not that, well, I put the VRS over there and big deal. The fascinating aspect of this, and if you think about it, is we are going in a model where a container essentially includes only one process, right? A container is one process. So what I'm doing here is I have policy control in any communication between processes within a system. So now my control of what is happening in the system goes down to the process level rather than the host level, right? I don't care about, oh, this packet came from this host. That's not good enough. I know that this packet came from this process now, right? So I have a very fine control on applying policy on a process-by-process level versus applying policy on a host-by-host level. And that's where I think the big and interesting thing is going to happen on this world. Now, so to summarize these things, and then I will jump over to my little Docker demo. What we try to do with Nuage is we try to enable pretty much every workload, right? We have gateways, we have hypervisors, we deal with Docker. We really don't care who is the hardware vendor. It can be any hardware vendor. And, you know, for the hardware vendors that have open interfaces, we are more than capable of controlling them, and we demonstrated that. And by running now the Nuage VSP network virtualization solution on top, what you can do is you can mix and match workloads, right? So if you want to create an environment where your Active Directory system is running in VMware, and you are running a workload that needs to authenticate with your Active Directory system, and your workload needs to run in Docker, and you have an OpenStack cloud because you did it and you want to use it, and you have some bare metal servers because you have a load balancer there, or you have a firewall there, we allow you to pretty much unify everything and have anybody connect to everybody, right? That's the idea of this system. So now I'm going to go and before I go to my Docker thing, let me realize I have more stuff. So the thing is, with this Docker stuff and the containers and the applications, right, there is an important aspect that says that, do I really have the right representations for my application users to use the system? And I found this article that I think is fascinating. I'm putting the link here. I definitely recommend it. Mark has done an unbelievable job in this article. And essentially what he says is, a lot of times with this SDN and API fascination, what we are doing is it's the similar as calling people to a restaurant and telling them, well, we're not going to give you food. We're just going to give you a bunch of tools to go cook your own food, right? And this doesn't really work with a lot of enterprises. And it doesn't work with application developers, right? So when you give people an API to instantiate flows in the network, they're like, yeah, okay, good, but what am I going to do with that, right? They need to do something more interesting, more flexible with that thing. So definitely very good reading, though. It's a long article, but extremely entertaining and very deep, I would say. So let's look at the OpenStack Neutron networks, right? So in the OpenStack Neutron abstractions,
we got to 20K.
We got to 20K. It's probably 8 minutes, right? I don't know if anybody was giving. So,
show off.
Get more.
Sunil wanted to cut my credit card out because I told you. Okay, so Neutron says my networking APIs in Neutron is create router, create subnet. I'm an app guy. I actually talked to our app guy that does this UI. He's a very app guy, right? You can see from the type of UI he does. He's like, I don't know what these things are. Why are you bothering me with these things? What networks, what routers, what are these things, right? I don't want to use a system where the abstractions are networks and routers and all these kind of things. And essentially, yes, they are good, but they are trying to imitate the physical world on this cloud world, right? I'm saying I want a subnet and I want a router. I don't care about it, honestly. And in reality, if you see from the app guy perspective, right? What do I see? Well, I have this tier and that tier and that tier, and they just talk to each other. Go do it. Whether they are in 1 subnet, in 10 subnets, in 25 subnets, that's your business. I don't want to care about it. Just do it. I know what are my tiers, I know my segmentation rules, and I know what wants to talk to each other. And that's all I care about. And that's all you should define about, right? Now, let me change my hat now and be the infrastructure guy. The infrastructure guy says, yeah, you application guy want to deliver this application that does these things, but how do I know you're not going to go and do telnet to the public internet? You're not going to open that port, you're not going to open the other port, right? I just saw a story, some CIO got fired because a load balancer had one more port open, right? So they worry about the security policies, about infrastructure policies, they worry about the resource allocation. And honestly, the infrastructure people see this bunch of applications, a bunch of black boxes that are just bothering them with requests, right? So somehow now we need to bridge this gap. We need to bridge the gap because between the application developer and the infrastructure people. And not that I'm hungry, but I think the answer is a sandwich. Okay? So the reality is that the way I see it is what the IT and enterprise policies are creating is they are creating the bread, and what the application policies are, they are the meat. And somehow we need a mechanism to put this together and create a single policy system that will allow the infrastructure people to create the enterprise, the business logic policies, and the applications people to just define what they need to define, right? And that's how exactly what we are doing here is the whole Nuage policy framework, and that's actually a very old slide that I have been using for 3 years, but now it's becoming more real because it took us 3 years to reach the conclusion is that we have application attributes, declarative application attributes, I need this, right? And then through a policy system, the application attributes translate to a network design, right? Still an abstract network design, and whether all these VMs will be placed in one subnet or one security zone or multiple subnets or multiple security zones, it's up to the policy system to figure out based on the policy rules. And now once I have this network design, then finally the binding and implementation is happening by mapping this network design to the actual infrastructure, to the actual routers through this network virtualization principle, right? So it's a 3-stage process. I declare my attributes, I convert it to a logical, if you want, design, and the logical design is mapped to the topology and the attributes. Honestly, we were there. I think now we have reached this point where we can create these applications in this abstraction. And what it happens though is the infrastructure and security people have the ability to come and create the basic principles, create network, create subnets, and I saw that in a lot of enterprises. When I was going to enterprises saying the end users will create subnets, they were like, what are you talking to me about? I cannot possibly allow that. When I was saying, oh, just use a 10.1.1 IP address space, they're like, what are you talking to me about? You have to go talk to my IPAM system to get IP addresses, right? Completely different mentality. So I have to allow the IT administrators, I have to allow the infrastructure people to create these network concepts, use whatever IP address management system they need, use whatever physical or virtual firewall they need, and then to expose these services, to publish these services if you want. And then I have to allow the application designers to come in and say, I have WebLogic and DB, and they talk to each other, and go figure it out. Right? And then where I come into the picture is the policy system comes into the picture and takes these two and translates them in this combination flow that places the tiers, creates ACLs, creates everything that needs to create, and makes it something operational. Right? And at the same time that I do that, because I learned this also the bad way, or the good way if you want, is, well, I do that and I end up on that, I better have a way to go backwards now and figure out that this flow belongs actually to this application, because otherwise I'm dead. When something goes wrong, that will go wrong, right? So I need both the forward and the backward somehow. And the backwards is actually much more challenging than the forward. Okay? Any questions? And then I'll jump in a demo and show you these things in action.
Curious if you guys are interested or have kept even your eyes on the work that's being done in OpenStack Congress as well as the group-based policy project?
Yes. So yes on both. We have one of the key contributors in the group-based policy project over there as well. We are also talking to Congress, to the Congress guys, and we are participating as much as we can there. We believe that both are very good. Group-based policy is met some hurdles in OpenStack. So it's being...
That was going to be my follow-up question, because there's kind of a sister project in Open Daylight. I'm curious if you guys are doing anything there as well.
No, we're not doing anything in Open Daylight with these things. We are doing things in OpenStack, and we believe a lot of these principles and concepts are not there, but we are actively contributing to any work over there.
Okay.
There are a number of enterprises that do have their own Congress kind of policy layer already in place.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
So that's where we are being consumed, basically, our policies, right?
So here you will see what I will show you first is, remember we had this old, if you want, networking type of world, right? We had the more traditional networking world where we had descriptions about domains, and on the domains we could add zones and subnets and so on, and over the last 1 year and a half, we added so many nerd knobs over there that it's just unbelievable. And, we have ingress policies, security policies that you can define, ingress security policies, redirect policies, policy groups, this, that, the other things. There is a lot of stuff going on. And when we're trying to instantiate domains and networks and stuff like that, because, a given customer wants one thing, the other wants another thing, you end up with more and more and more and more knobs, right? So then after a while, we realized it's pretty much impossible now for an app guy to use this, because if I instantiate a network and I say, oh, by the way, do you want the subnet to do DHCP, whatever, DHCP relay, or you don't want DHCP relay? Do you want the other subnet to do our proxy or not? I mean, they get lost, right? So, but nevertheless, we have the model, and what the model allows us to do is, as an IT administrator, I can come on the network, right? I have instantiated a network here. I have instantiated, let's say, a domain. This is a layer 3 virtual network, and I can create a whole bunch of rules here that I will put as higher priority, saying, for example, you know, here I want to allow ICMP traffic, or here I want to allow, you know, I want to drop all telnet traffic, right? So I put a policy rule that says telnet traffic from anybody to anybody is dropped. I can put all my policy rules, right? What HTTP is allowed, what protocol is allowed, what is not allowed, and so on. Whatever I do in this view of the system, as the network administrator, it's only me that can do it. End users cannot come, cannot touch this part of the system, right? So I create my top policy rules, I create my bottom policy rules, and now everything else that the applications do goes in between. Right? So I have full control of how the system is operating. Now, when applications come in, and let's do a simple example, right? So let's assume I want to build an application, and I want first a private DNS service. And the reason I want a DNS service, I want to use like something like Sky DNS to auto-learn IP addresses or whatever. I don't like whatever. So I want to do, for example, a private DNS service. I come and say, create a new application, and I'm going to put it in this domain. And this is my new application, and I say, my DNS server has a single application tier, and this is the DNS tier. Everything is auto-calculated, and I'm going to say that, by the way, my DNS server is just a proxy to the internet. So I'm simply going to allow, I don't have DNS traffic. Let's assume this was DNS. I'm simply going to allow DNS traffic over to the internet. And actually, let me show you how to define that before I allow this. So we define a whole bunch of application services. So defining DNS traffic, somebody can do in advance and say DNS is port UDP 53. Okay. So now I have my DNS application here. I delete this rule. Let me add the rule. So here is DNS. So I can talk from my DNS server to the internet, and I'm going to say that from the same network as my DNS server, everybody can come and resolve their DNS requests to me, right? And that's it. My DNS services are, my DNS network, at least, configuration is up and running.
And again, this is stateful at layer 4, so you don't have to configure reverse rules or anything like that.
Just then I want to define. I have my Puppet servers, because before I bring my applications up, I need a whole bunch of Puppet servers. So I'm going to bring up my Puppet servers. I'm going to put them on the same domain. I'm going to create my Puppet application, and I'm going to create a tier. And I'm going to say, well, all the other applications in this domain, if they want their Puppet connectivity, they can come to me on whatever, HTTP, let's say. I don't know what Puppet uses, but let's assume it's HTTP, and I'm done. My Puppet service is up and running right now. Well, I have to bring up the VMs, but the Puppet networking, at least, is up and running, right? That's all it takes. So now I go and create a 3-tier application. Let's say I want to create a 3-tier app. And I want to put it in the same network. And the trick here is that when I do the selection, right, which network I can put the application, this is determined by a permission system and a policy system. So when you create networks, you have to publish who can actually come and put applications here. Here I have free-for-all kind of thing. So I'm creating my 3-tier application, and here is my 3-tier application, and things are very simple, right? I have the internet. Here is the internet. I have my web server. Oops. And then I say from the internet to the web server, you can go with HTTP. And then I have the whatever, the logic server. You get the point here, right? From this to logic server, you can go with MySQL, let's say, whatever, right? And that's it. That's my application design. Now, what this thing has gone in the background and done is it has gone here and created a whole bunch of rules and a whole mess of flows and rules that any human being that tries to debug this now is going to be like, what the heck am I doing over here, right? So, but I have the backward references, but you will see here, you know, it will say, for example, from the DNS subnet, you go to the DNS zone. From the DNS subnet to anything, you can actually go with 53 port UDP, whatever. So it creates both the ingress rules and the egress rules. Remember, our firewall actually has rules. When a packet comes out of a VM, before it's forwarded, we actually check the packet. And when a packet tries to go back into a VM, before we send it to a VM, we check the packet, right? So we have both ingress and ingress rules to check about. So this thing creates a whole bunch of policy rules. And, you know, these applications that I did are pretty trivial, right? I mean, if I have 10 ports to open and 5 more components, it becomes a little bit more complex. And now, what I'm going to do here is, let me start this. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to my demo. My windows were down. So I need to do this. SSH, Dimitri.
So this application designer really created the templates, the networking instances in the database using basically application design primitives, right? And now he's basically just bringing up the compute to support the application. And we're going to basically just download next to the compute the rules that we design.
So now let me show you how Docker works with all these things, right? So now this is a server. The server is running our version of Open vSwitch. If I do this, you will see there is an Open vSwitch running. It's actually connected up to our controller. And what I'm going to do here is, let's pick one of these applications. I'm going to show the easy part and then the hard part. So let's pick the DNS server. And I'm going to instantiate a container and attach it to the DNS server, right? So you will see how the Docker integration works. So the only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say to Docker, well, if you want to create a Docker container on the DNS app, and the tier, I call it DNS as well, and create it on the DNS tier, and call the server my server, and then I need to just activate a container here. I'm just going to activate Ubuntu that I have running on my private repository here. Okay? So I'm telling Docker to essentially activate an Ubuntu container. And I'm telling Docker when it activates the Ubuntu container that this container belongs in the application DNS in the tier DNS. Okay? And I'm just going to activate this container. Oops. Come on. That's what happens. Let me activate something else. Oh, that's why. Let me activate this guy. Okay, and the Docker container is up. If I go inside the Docker container, you will see that it got an IP address, 1079.14.2. And if I come here, you will see that the container showed up there, and it's 1079.42, right? So my whole Docker script essentially says that when I start a container, just tell me to which app and which tier this container belongs. And then I take care of everything else, right? And here, I'm going to drop this guy down. But before I show the final part of this demo, I'm going to go to this website that I have built. So I have built a 2-tier application. This is a website. I'm going to run WordPress on the web layer. I'm going to run DB. a MySQL database on the database layer, and I have my internet. And by the way, because all these are virtual networks, if I want my WordPress servers accessible through the public internet, I just come here and give it an attribute that everything that gets activated in this tier, give it a floating IP as well. Give it a routable IP address. Don't just give private IP addresses, right? So I'm going to go in my system here, and I have a little script that you will see. What it does is it says activate MySQL on the app website on the tier DB and give it a password, and then activate WordPress on the app website and on the tier web and give it a password, right? It's as simple as that. And I'm going to do my little demo here, and the containers are coming up. And if everything has worked in the background that I hope it did, see, I got a floating IP here, 1031.12.17. And because I hope my DNS integration will work, if I go here and go to WordPress.app.tier.app, oh, my DNS thing didn't work. That's okay. Go to the IP address. I lost my Windows and something failed. I should be able to go to my WordPress app if it came up. Okay, and my WordPress app is up and running pretty much in seconds, right? So, fully configured WordPress application with a database backend in seconds, right? And actually, if you go here in the WordPress container and you see the logs, you will see the guy came up, it connected to the database, it said that it's fine, it created the database WordPress, and it's running fine, and on and on and on, right? So you see that with a very simple integration, I can, start and stop Docker containers and all these things by just saying start this container in this app and this tier. And interestingly enough, we have done the same thing with OpenStack. So I have an OpenStack instance here running, and you will see this OpenStack instance. Oops. Has currently no networks and no subnets. Right? And the only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say neutron. It's through our extension. Neutron, Nuage bind, create, does a sub DNS, does tier DNS, and I will give it a port name and say server. And then I think I need to do a glance image list, and I can start now a VM, Nova boot, a VM, does image. I need to grab something from here. Let's grab the first guy. Does flavor 1, does nick, port ID equals whatever I did here. Didn't like something, I put it twice.
While he is doing that, just one clarification on the actual GUI that we are showing, the virtualized service architect. Everything that you see in the GUI is built on top of our APIs. So just to be very clear, everything is exposed through APIs, RESTful APIs.
So I have my VM up and running here, and if I go back here on the DNS server, you will see that my VM is running here, and here it is. It's healthy, it's happy, and on, right? So you see both an OpenStack type of integration. The OpenStack integration is with extensions, as well as Docker integration, and I can launch just with this simple API. I want to launch a VM in this app and in this tier. Nothing complicated, no subnets, nothing like that.
Show all the rules that got instantiated.
Yeah, I showed the rules. Yeah.
Tell me about the reusability of all this, because I mean it's awesome, but there was a lot of configuring things from because it wasn't configured. I'm curious, now that you have these policies created and you have that general architecture for like a WordPress site. Let's say somebody else wants to spin up a WordPress site.
So there is
if they're an application developer, they don't know networking, they just want to consume what you've built. How does that work?
So it works in two ways. There is a template mechanism. So I can create a WordPress application as a template, and then I instantiate based on the template. That's how we are doing all the domains and stuff like that. And what is not, unfortunately, in this version of the software is, but it's coming pretty soon, is an export import. So essentially, this thing that I did is a YAML or a JSON file behind the scenes. So I can export and import this YAML or JSON file, and you make it part of your application in GitHub together with your code.
Please make that a big part of the community, because if you publish those files,
we plan to do that, right?
You'll then be able to say, oh, okay, so you can download MySQL in WordPress, or you can download our YAML file and it deploys everything you need.
That's
exactly right. So essentially, what you will see coming from us is we will publish an SDK, we will publish the Docker integration. All this stuff will be part of the open source community. Our plugin in OpenStack is already open source, but not this extension. It's going to hopefully make it the next release.
Is that a Neutron plugin proper, or is that an ML2 mechanism driver?
Right now, it's a Neutron. We have both.
Oh, cool.
We have a full and we have an ML2. The ML2 is not so fully featured yet.
But definitely people loved it because they said, I start my application in development domain, and then I want to move it into production and maybe run different version, but the structure will stay the same.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, the one thing that my organization's going through a big SAP HANA installation, and I can't even tell you like how awesome it would be to download, and that's like, we talk WordPress, right? Ooh, web app and database, right? You know, it's like, oh no, you're talking this massive validated design that companies like SAP are putting out, and it's like complex machinery, you know, in the form of that. Like, it would be super useful just to download. You could tweak it. You can tweak it once it's done, but just to be able to download that and start from something that makes sense.
Absolutely right. So that's the whole concept. Once this import-export is ready, we're gonna publish whatever YAML thing we can, and then allow other people to come and join and publish whatever YAML template they need. Right. So that's part of the idea here.
Yeah, we do have a template store that could be maintained as well at enterprise level, and you saw the dashboard with services, right? That people can create in there.
Yeah.
How is it licensed?
How is it licensed? It's licensed as a software application. Okay. And the model is in most places on a per server type of concept.
It's perpetual per server.
Perpetual per server.
Gotcha. All right.
Question came in from Twitter. How do you address security for the containers?
Okay, so, well, I'm not going to comment on all the ways to do containers. I'm going to concentrate on the networking part of security, right? Because the security of containers is obviously a much bigger topic. So for the networking part, obviously, we apply the policies at the vSwitch, so they are applied outside the area of the container. All the proper guidelines for containers have to be used, right? Don't allow people to create containers as roots, don't give them root privileges and stuff like that. The community is very actively working on all the other isolation mechanisms. What I see happening in a lot of enterprises, though, is people are giving out servers to app teams, and they are saying, go deploy your containers there and do whatever you want. They don't really care so much about they are not so sensitive that this container is going to override this container. But having said that, I know that the community is very actively, contributing there. So I'm waiting for that.
Is there a compliance element to this then? So is there a way of like reporting and auditing, an easy way to satisfy kind of QSA type people?
So yes. So everything here is actually every action that I take in the system through a REST API or through a VM activation or whatever is actually indexed on an events database, is a fully searchable database. Unlike syslog that is free for all unstructured stuff, this is a structured database. So you can actually search, show me all the stuff that this user did between this day and that day or whatever, right? So it's a fully searchable and indexed database. And obviously what happens is when you are actually on the networking place, I'll show you that here, is that when you see this application now, if I go in this application, I'm going to actually be able to see all the policy decisions associated with this application, all the ingress security rules created for this application, all the egress security rules created.
QoS as well.
If I click here, I will see these are the exact ACLs that are pushed down on the forwarding path for every application, for every component, everything that is available.
Is there a way of exporting this into like a document or?
Everything is accessible through API, right? So if you do get VM UUID slash
you can
close,
do diff between versions, compare to see what changed and run it in there. I think the whole policy compliance is changed substantially and differently, because from the moment you put the app designer design in place, there is no human touch after that. Everything is generated as the VM are allocated. Everything is generated automatically.
Yeah, I was thinking from like a human readable standpoint. So just, there's a lot of kind of security guys out there that don't really want to kind of get too dirty, but they just want someone to read and go, okay, well, we'll now test against this kind of thing.
Right. So there was a question also on Twitter by my buddy Michael, whether we looked at Weaver and stuff like that. Yeah, I kind of looked at it. I think it's at the very infancy state. It's, it's prototype type of things. I think what we were trying to show here is that we can deploy these things at very large scale, right? I activated my 20,000 Docker containers over there just using this exact same APIs, right? So I think there are a lot of interesting things happening in the community, and I think we are trying to contribute as much as we can there, but nevertheless we have our boundaries in the system.